Thanks very much, Sarah, for organizing this, and thank you all for coming. One of the things that we were asked to address is kind of what's the difference between outreach and marketing and how that all runs together. And we've seen some really good case studies of how people are doing various things with their existing product. And I'm going to try to take a little bit of a different view and show how we, as a technology company, have closed the loop with the feedback from our community, so that it's not just us talking about what we have, but it's actually affecting what we do as part of our product. And those of you who are in the morning's keynote may recognize some of the things that I go through here. So, as Sarah said earlier, there is this sort of, the old model is a simplified kind of view. You've got, librarians, you've got scholars, you've got publishers, your stakeholders in the whole process here. And along comes the internet, and some people say that this is going to happen. And you could argue in a way that this did happen in some ways, but since, we're tribal beasts, we created our own organizations, and what we end up getting is something that's kind of more like this. So it's a mess, a whole lot of stakeholders, a whole lot of different producers, consumers. There are robots that are consumers, and there's digital things being consumed and analog things being consumed, and data and code, and it's being disseminated, and stakeholder roles are merging and crossing. And so you still have the scholars, you still have the publishers, you still have the publishers and the librarians, but now you have so many more different channels and objects and overlapping roles together in all of this. So Mendeley was launched in the middle of all that confusion to try to say, well, how do we kind of grab some of these new distribution channels and modes and everything and present researchers a really compelling, useful product that kind of helps them connect these bits and pieces up together in a rational way. And so we had this product that was essentially just a desktop application you could dump all of your PDFs into, and it makes it easier when you go to write a paper to generate your citations. That was the initial hook for the whole thing. But we started getting all of this this data about who's reading what, who are they sharing it with, these discussions erupting around the communities of content, that we were able to do lots of really kind of interesting experiments to see what are people doing and what should we be building. So one of the things that we realized right away is there is this chicken and egg kind of relationship with the community and the communication, right? It's no good to have a comment box on your stuff if there's not an active community going through and using those, right? And then vice versa, it's if you have a group of people out there, but you're not, providing them a way to engage, then your community is never going to get there, right? So it's a little bit of a chicken and egg relationship, and you need to do these experiments to test out who these people are, how they're engaging with their content, what works for them, not just kind of what you as a subject matter expert or an industry expert think people should be doing. One of the things that we learned was that, and I think PLOS has certainly learned this to some degree as well, is having the paper and the comment box underneath the paper really isn't super compelling for a lot of people. But we have this annotation tool where people are pulling these things up in the reader, and they're highlighting it and they're reading it, and a lot of what they're doing is just for their own personal use. But we get tremendous amounts of usage of sharing these annotations. So they'll put these documents in groups, and they'll invite their colleagues in, and you'll get different people in there annotating the same document. We see a whole lot more, just in terms of the actual metrics that we look at, a whole lot more engagement, a whole lot more use of the annotation tools as opposed to the commenting tools. So that's, that was something that jumped out of us for us right away, and we're working on now, implementing interoperable annotations now that there's sort of more of a robust spec around how to do that, so that our annotations can coexist with annotations made on other platforms like the Paper Hive, some of you may have heard a little bit about. Another thing that we learned was, so we have all this information about various people or things people are reading, and you can do simple kind of things like, oh, well, you've read these 9 things, this other person's read the same 9 things, but you have a 10th thing that's different. Maybe, each other should be recommended the thing that's out. It's kind of a simple idea, but there's all these algorithms that you can run and test to recommend things to your readers. We tested a whole bunch of these recommendation products, and we started sending out emails. Just after a little bit of optimization, we were getting a 40% open rate and a 10 or 12% click-through rate for our emails. And those of you who've done any email marketing at all, feel like that's generally a pretty good thing. And we've since optimized it and even improved on these numbers quite a bit more. The way that we were able to do this, and the point that I'm trying to make that's sort of distinct from some of these examples you heard before, is that this wasn't a case where we had our product and we were kind of applying this community layer to it. We had to integrate this all the way through from the very bedrock of the product. We had to have a unified data service that allowed us to run all of these tests of things that might strike a chord with our community. We had to listen to them, but also look at what they were actually doing, and provide all of these experiments, with this Agile framework to see what they're actually, engaging with, and then figuring out why is this compelling for these different groups? How do we support that more? And so we've run through a whole lot of experiments here. We've done follower recommendations, related articles. We've had some experiments with conferences, recommended jobs, and one thing that we started noticing right away is that we have this thing, and you can add PDFs and papers to it, but people were using these groups. We didn't block it if they added something else that wasn't a PDF or a paper, and people were uploading spreadsheets and image files and all kinds of supplementary data stuff in these groups as well. And so we thought, well, that's kind of in retrospect fairly obvious. And so we've put together this new thing to see if it strikes a chord with the community as well. It's a data.mendeley.com, supporting upload and download of files of any type. We listened to what the people were telling us that they want in a data service, which, mostly librarians say you want permanence, archiving and versioning. Researchers say they want to be able to upload and download from anywhere. They want to be able to share things easily with their colleagues. And they want it to go where they go. You don't want to have to stop what you're doing, take off your gloves, sit down at your desktop computer to engage with it. You want to be right there with you as you're working, and you want to be able to cite this stuff. If data is going to work in the same way that publications or anything else work, which is what we were hearing, then you want to have this citation. So we went out and engaged with the Force 11 community, which is coming up with all of these new different ways that are meeting the needs of researchers in this new environment. That crazy, messy slide that I showed earlier was actually attributed to Marianne Martin, who basically started the whole Force 11 organization. And so, the general idea here is that we have taken this approach to our outreach and made it a very core bedrock part of not just how we do our communications. We don't run community and outreach out of the marketing department. But this whole concept of outreach and engagement comes through to the very bedrock of our product as well. So the things that we are doing, the types of services that we're iterating through, we come up with these ideas to do it, but based on while we're out in the community hearing people talk about and these sort of express needs, as well as the kinds of things that we think make sense from our sort of expert perspective. So if you're just looking at your Google Analytics and your site stats and that kind of stuff, that'll tell you what people are doing with the things that you make available to them. But it won't tell you what they would do with the things that you haven't shown them yet. So you have to have kind of both of those things, and you need to have that framework of, not to be too buzzwordy, but that framework of innovation, so that you can try these things and iterate through, and like you were saying, kill the things off that don't work. Don't waste time and effort and resources on them. So the last little thing that I wanted to put up is people talk a lot about all these different bits and pieces being part of scholarly infrastructure, and I think the community, in terms of trying to innovate and meet the needs of the researchers, really messes up quite a lot and gets itself tied up in knots trying to think about how do we provide, what is infrastructure versus what is services. What people confuse infrastructure for products and not for the underlying things that they do. Cloud storage versus Amazon Web Services. Links and things, not necessarily DOIs, right? Identifiers, but not the thing that is being identified. Databases, but not necessarily PubMed. Preprint repositories, but not necessarily SSRN. These are, in Hypothesis is a group that is facilitating interoperable annotation. Annotation is a thing. It's an affordance that scholars want, but it's just one instantiation thereof. So I would like, when you set up your organization and you want to do some of these kind of experiments, keep that in mind. Keep a functional point of view in mind and not a specific product point of view in mind. To be able to make that work. So that's my product take on how to make engagement with your community work as for your organization and to bring you some more, success. So I guess I could take a question or two.
Yeah,
do you want to jump?
We do a couple questions. Yeah.
Hi, so listening to your audience is a key component of product development. We heard this morning today that lots of different programs are rubbish in some cases. I was just wondering if you could share some of the mechanisms that you use at MLA to gather insights, other than analytics.
Right. So I think the most important things that we do, in addition to watching the analytics of the things that we've built, is to have this Agile framework where we can test a lot of things serially and kill the things off that aren't working rapidly. So we don't use the analytics as a measure of success. We use analytics to see, is this thing getting traction or do we need to kill it? And if something doesn't get that right amount of traction, after a while, you stop wasting resources on it, you move on and try the next thing. So fundamentally what we do is we do get out there into the community. We talk to the standards organizations, Force 11, NISO, DataCite, all of these groups, and that's a big, I think, important part of my role. But then we go back and we sit down with the product owners of these different products and say, here's what we're hearing, here's my sort of distilled take on things. Here are some experiments we might want to run. So it's really hard, and you have to be very careful to not get too attached to a specific solution that you think has to be the right one, and actually collect the data to see if, for your particular product, for your particular community, is this something that actually works.
Other questions? All right, we got our final speaker.